Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Porter's Product Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Porter, of course, and today we're diving into the world of product marketing for developers. Marketing to developer audience requires a really unique approach, balancing technical credibility, community engagement, and avoiding those traditional sales-heavy tactics. So joining us today is Katie Miller. She is a developer marketing leader and steering committee member at the Developer Relations Foundation, with an incredible background in product marketing and developer relations from Slack, Asana, and Google, just to name a few. She holds a master's degree from Stanford and a bachelor's from Hamilton. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I like any opportunity to nerd out on all things developer product marketing.
Absolutely. Well, you're the go-to expert for us today, so thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's start with the basics. How does marketing to developers differ from traditional B2B or B2C marketing, and what unique challenges do product marketers face when engaging a developer audience?
That's like such a good question. And it really harkens back to my first day when I moved from a more traditional product marketing role on the ad tech side, where I had APIs as part of my portfolio, but it wasn't my primary focus, into an exclusively developer marketing role. And I remember this sentiment of, welcome to developer marketing. You can't market to developers. And I was like, why did you hire me? Am I employable here? And I think what I learned really quickly is it's that notion of what is the question behind the question. And it's not that you can't market to developers, but it's that sentiment around who they are and what drives them and what their motivations are and so forth. And so when you ask that question of what's unique, in many ways, the frameworks are the same. And I go back to something actually, we both did a little bit of some time at Google. The CMO, Lorraine Toohill, had this famous quote, know the user, know the magic, connect the two. That might be paraphrasing it. And so that was the framework that drove all of our work. And so it was always the question of, well, what makes it unique for each audience? And that's what it is for developers, is just like marketing. I'm a runner. I'm a competitive runner. So just like how Adidas or Brooks is going to think about me and profiling me as a middle-aged, somewhat competitive female athlete, we need to do the same thing. We need to know who that developer user is. We need to know what that magic is and then connect the dots together. And what differentiates it is who the user is and what the magic is. And then the bridge that connects those two things together are what makes it distinct from B2B or B2C marketing. It doesn't mean that there isn't magic. It doesn't mean that we can't surprise and delight. It just means that what might surprise and delight me from a marketing campaign around competitive running shoes is going to be a very different sort of magic for developers. My go-to phrase for what is the pixie dust for developers is hyper pragmatism. They're very solution oriented. They're very slow to trust and quick to lose trust. And they want to solve problems and be on the cutting edge and be relevant and be recognized. And so some of the tactics and techniques then may be different than what traditional advertising or marketing campaign might look like to an enterprise C-suite person, or again, to a middle-aged, somewhat competitive female runner.
Yeah, that's great. And this is something I brought up before too. But again, marketing in 101 is understanding your audience.
100%.
And so with developers, it's no different, right? Like B2B, you're going to be talking to buyers, CTOs, CIOs, line of business leaders. But when you're talking to developers specifically, you're going to have some very tailored messaging. And I like that, the framework, yes, that we worked under is like know the user, know the magic, connect the two. And yes, knowing the user is that first fundamental piece, because you need to know what they're dealing with, their pain points are, how they're dealing with it. And so that's a really good perspective on, what the differences are when marketing to developers.
Yeah. And I think just as a thing for those who are listening who feel intimidated by the notion of developer marketing as a career or as part of their portfolio, again, I kind of stumbled into it because I was working on ad tech for large advertisers and agencies, and APIs, which allows scale and automation, became part of that. is that if we take that framework and curiosity, even if we don't come from a traditionally technical academic background, it doesn't make it prohibitive to be highly effective developer marketers or technical product marketers.
Yes. Yeah. And that's good. I'm glad you brought that up because, if somebody, there's not a lot of people out there who probably don't think I'm going to start out right out of college, going to be a technical product marketing manager, write to developers. And so that's a good story to kind of share. Like you kind of stumbled on it in a way and you were able to obviously learn the basics and, you had that marketing background before, but then it was just pivoting to that particular audience and understanding their particular needs. So that's great.
Exactly.
All right. So now when it comes to messaging specifically, what strategies have you found most effective for crafting messaging that resonates with developers while avoiding overly sales-driven language?
Exactly. It gets back to that hyper pragmatism. It's really showing, not telling. It's signaling that you've listened to them and deeply understand the problems and are presenting solutions that truly will solve them. So authenticity, solution orientation, as well as the source of the content. And this is where having really, really strong working relationships with developer relations teams, with other technical teams like product management, customer engineering, and so forth becomes so important. The purpose of developer relations at its core is to be building trustworthy relationships with developers. That's a highly oversimplified description of the practice. And yet seeing your team as not just being the person who's going to implement the email automations or push send on the social media outreach or is going to be building the scaffolding for a demo at an event, but seeing your full team as including developer relations, having that messaging and positioning, having the delivery of that content come from people who are of the community, who themselves are users of that technology and who can speak to it honestly and to demonstrate it honestly is what really sells it. I think one of the most humbling yet effective things that I've seen at events over the years is live coding demos, which when they go wrong, they can be so scary and humbling. And yet at the same time, coding isn't perfect. I think there are a lot of folks, and you may be of this ilk. I know you've spent some time working in the generative AI space on different tools. Like we're trying to have things that will make coding less error prone and more automated and more accurate and so forth. And yet at the same time, if humans are involved in something, there are going to be mistakes. And so I think developers love seeing that humility. They love seeing the coding in action to truly understand how is this going to work? How effective is it? Where are the pitfalls so that they can make good choices?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's so interesting right now about how there's this expectation that AI specifically needs to be perfect. And yet we're okay with humans being imperfect. So why does this, something that's created by humans, why does that need to be, 100%? Just a little bit of this double standard. So I think it's interesting that you bring that up, like to have developers with the understanding of, maybe going through a live demo. Okay, you know what? This didn't work out. But you know what? Guess what? That's real. This is real life as opposed to somebody that might have some vaporware where they're not even willing to allow people to have hands-on keyboards. It's like, well, if you can't even allow me to just play with it and break it, then there's something to that. Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up.
Yeah, and vaporware does not fly. And I realized I just said, for any of the runners listening, I think Nike makes a shoe called the Vaporfly. It might work in the running realm. I really, for those who are venturing into the developer marketing or developer relations space, the importance of being able to truly touch the technology and see how it works. I think that there's a real openness and sentiment to beta testing if it can be done in a safe way. Again, it's that tension between being on the cutting edge and having something that we feel confident putting into production and that it's not going to break, it's not going to be deprecated, it's not insecure. Yeah. So, even putting a beta label on something, but still that need to, and you talked about effective messaging. I'm going to extrapolate that to effective campaigning and so forth and promotions is having something they can touch, having code labs, having hackathons they can join, having samples that are available, having sandboxes. That really feeds into that trust and authenticity and is in many ways an extension of the credibility of the people who are making the product and making the content.
Yeah, absolutely. That credibility is key, especially with communities like developers. They can be pretty tight knit and they need to have some of that kind of shared, see how other developers are working within a specific tool. So yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So obviously developers are really known for preferring technical educational content over just purely promotional materials. How do you create and distribute content that provides real value while also driving adoption?
And this is one of my overused phrases is threading the needle. And it takes some titrating on this one because on one hand, the go-to default is creating videos that are distributed on YouTube, having social media channels and so forth. And those are notoriously problematic to connect into marketing funnels. And oftentimes it feels like they become a default vanity metric and it's very easy to poo-poo or dismiss them. I don't fully do it because I really do think that, especially if you have some good analysts that you work with, you can model out in aggregate the movement between the volume of views to the volume of engagement and so forth. So even if it isn't a programmed funnel in analytics, you at least will see movement that is getting people in the right direction.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you really want to know who these people are. And so it really is thinking about if you have to do any gatekeeping, what is the absolute minimum amount of information that you need to ask for so that, because they don't want to give over their information. They definitely don't want to put in any payment information until they feel really good. What is the minimum amount of information that you can get them into a CRM system and yet they don't feel like they're going to be spammed with emails, they're not going to be taken advantage of, that they're going to be understood? That is a big piece of it, and that there's real value on the other side of what they're handing over. So they're going to get access to a developer program that's going to have a sandbox, access to beta opportunities, access to experts to ask questions and things like that. So it's not an either or, it's just being really, really thoughtful about the point at which you ask for personally identifiable information. And that if you are doing things top of the funnel, that you are really intentional about what those metrics mean and how to tell a story of how they feed into achieving business goals without them coming across as vanity metrics.
Yeah, and that's good call. Really, what you're saying is get the least amount of information as possible so they don't feel overwhelmed and inundated by your promotional materials, so that they truly feel like, one, they're really getting access to something that they could test out and break if possible, but two, they're not going to get bombarded by you unless they want more information. So that really seems to resonate. And I think a lot of, I think most audiences want that, but I think that's obviously very particular to the developers so that they can play with their toys in a manner of speaking.
And I think with that, so I think taking newsletters are an example, which I've been involved in multiple developer newsletters, which have reasonably strong opt-in and reasonably low opt-out rates. Within that, making it very, very easy to control one's permissions. And it sounds counterintuitive because the last thing that you want to do, and I think about being a member of I have a local spa where I'm a member for massages or whatever. It is impossible to unsubscribe to that thing. And why are you still? And it's it's just the friction is and yet with developers, they'll figure it out how to unsubscribe if they really want to, because they're, again, very solution oriented. They're very scrappy. And yet, in some ways, making it really easy and transparent to opt in and opt out is another way to gain trust. And so they may opt out for sure, and that's a bummer. But if you show that you've designed something in such a way that you kind of trust them to judge what's right and wrong for them, that's another just a little user experience thing that signals you should trust us, because we're going to trust you to decide if this content is right for you.
Totally. Yeah. It's funny you should mention that. Yeah, there are multiple other businesses out there where I feel like I've unsubscribed like 6,000 times, and yet somehow they still keep coming back. So,
oh yes,
yeah, that's key, and that's good to kind of understand that those newsletters are clearly being effective if there's lots of adoption and not a lot of opt-outs. So that's really interesting to point out. So once you had this developer marketing strategy in place, and we've talked a little bit about this, but how do you measure its effectiveness, and what key metrics or indicators do you track? And how do you iterate based on that data?
Yeah, those are, I love these questions. This is so fun. The answer is it depends, which I know is such a like, I'm totally punting that question. The first is it really boils down to a couple of things. What are the business objectives that you're driving towards? And that is going to vary depending on, it's going to vary depending on where the product is in the market, how your organization is incentivized, which is a really big one. Some marketing organizations might carry revenue goals, some might not carry revenue goals. And so how you think about your metrics is what are the broader business objectives, and how does your piece of the work feed into those business objectives, as well as, again, where you are in that product adoption life cycle. If you're something that is brand new to market and it's going to have a long lead time for adoption, again, that notion of if somebody is going to be building an application that needs to be put into production, you're going to have security things you're going to have to worry about. You're going to have maintenance things you're going to have to worry about. Like, unless you're a very, very lean and scrappy startup and you're like building right then and there, like putting something from I am going to use this thing to starting to run it and accruing charges is not going to be a particularly quick lead time. Yeah. So needing to back into that and be like, what are going to be the key benchmarks along the way that show that we're moving to success? Mm-hmm. If you're fortunate to be connected in with a larger organization that has a robust CRM system, and you get partnership and agreement that any leads that you're collecting from your developer marketing initiatives can go into that pipeline for tracking, which is something that we were able to do with Google Cloud, then you can look at revenue targets and revenue outcomes and be like, we influence this percent of marketing influenced revenue and so forth, or marketing influenced leads, depending on what stage you are in the pipeline. In a lot of instances, though, that's not going to be the case, especially if something's earlier in the hopper. And that's where it might be thinking much more about sentiment, and it might be looking at getting uptick or participation in partnership deals or beta programs from strategic customers and things like that, because it's the names on the slide that are going to give credibility when the team is ready to go out and start selling. And so I always like to say that it depends. And what's most important is that you're aligned to business objectives. You have a way to track the statistics and the performance, and that you, to your point, that you're actually looking at them and saying, like, is this having impact, and making adjustments accordingly. And I can talk about that. I have an example I can give in a second of how we've used the data. But there are teams I've been on that are like, we have a North Star. And I said, but one thing, and I think because this landscape is so complex, especially because we often have indirect influence on business outcomes, I always like to say it's a constellation of metrics, and it's really the story that you tell behind them, with that story being like, this is how we move the business forward. Yeah.
And I think that definitely resonates. I had one leader at Google who would basically ask the question, we need to ask ourselves, how are we doing? And that's what you're describing, is that kind of idea of monitoring what those business objectives are and being aligned to them, and then over time seeing what the progress is, and then you can answer that question, how are we doing? So I definitely am aligned with you on that. Why don't you share that example that you were mentioning?
So I think like a really easy and straightforward example is an email marketing campaign. And so what we had done is it actually wasn't necessarily just shifting the approach that we took to marketing, but it was also shifting our approach to understanding what the product adoption lifecycle looked like. So we had kind of a drip campaign and spaced it out. And so depending on the actions that somebody took in within the developer console, we would either skip steps within the email nurture, or we would send them subsequent emails to nudge them along. And I think what we discovered with that is we had a hypothesis that it was not just easy to use and to get started, but that folks had a sense of what they should be building. And so they would get to a certain point and they would go through the hello world experience. And it was really simple and intuitive and straightforward. And then they wouldn't do anything. And so that was a really important signal to us. And then we went back and thought about it in terms of the content that we needed to create, not necessarily just to push out via email, but in general, folks were saying, this is lovely, but this is a blank slate and we don't know why we would build this. Like, we don't know. It had to do with building workflows and app integrations on a SaaS platform. And they're like, I don't have good use cases or frameworks for this. And so we said, okay, we at least know that the proof of concept is there, that like there aren't barriers to get started technically. And they don't know why they would be building on this and investing the time and what problems it was going to solve. And so that was a great example, even if it wasn't the best thing that happened. It was a great learning moment to say, we need to not be focused on kind of nurture. We really need to be focused on what's that piece of content they need at that stage to show value to their business of taking time to learn this technology and use this technology.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good example to kind of see, where how the messaging was doing. You kind of pivoted, you kind of took the, midstream, kind of understood, all right, we need to make these changes and then kind of move from there. So I think
exactly.
That's a good example. All right, Katie. Well, this has really been a really insightful conversation. Your experience in working with developer audiences, Slack, Asana, Google, I feel like has really given us a master class on engaging in this unique community.
Thank you.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to do my traditional quick rapid fire round to get to know you a little bit better and see how you answer this compared to a lot of the other guests. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah.
All right. First question, favorite marketing tool?
Okay. So audience probably knows I had a little bit of time to plan for this. So my very, very first instinct was the Google Analytics plugin in Google Sheets. But I also worked at Slack and Asana. So then I felt really, really badly not saying those, because I also think, honestly, I feel like not just Slack and Asana, but using Slack and Asana together. And if you want, you can throw Google Sheets in there because all of them connect and are interoperable.
All the things.
But I feel like in my early days in developer marketing at Google, when I was looking to build out like quick, automated, scrappy dashboards, I was amazed at what I could do using the Google Analytics plugin in Google Sheets. It was pretty amazing.
That's awesome. Good. Well, I like that you can try to put all those in together.
They do all connect.
Nobody's following up on this, so it's not like you had to, but that's good that you should.
Ping me, I promise.
All right, second question is, what's the most underrated skill in product marketing?
I would say this is a hill I will die on, including when it comes to thinking about recruiting and building out teams, is curiosity and commitment to learning. And the reason for that is I don't come from a traditional technical education background. I was a history major with a minor in Russian studies and a master's degree in education. And I actually think there are skills that are teachable and there are attributes that are not. And I truly believe with that curiosity and commitment to learning that, especially in the technical marketing space, that really, really, really solid product marketers from the consumer or B2B space, if they have the right mindset, can be highly effective in technical marketing.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that 100%. I had a leader a long time ago who was very accomplished, went to the top business school, and went to several consulting firms, was a high-ranking leader at one of the big companies I was at. And even through all that, he said the most important quality that he had to get him to where he was at was curiosity. And that's, I think, resonates very much with what you're saying is you can have fancy degrees or really cool companies on your resume, but you need to have that ability to continue to learn, because every job out there, or most jobs out there that require knowledge work, are going to need you to adapt and move on the fly and learn something new on a constant basis. So I'm with you on that for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, third rapid fire question. What's the biggest mistake to avoid in product marketing?
Making assumptions.
Okay.
And talking before listening.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. That's good. Being able to kind of take other people's perspective before really getting into your own. Fourth question. What do you wish you knew when you had started in this
to
career
listen
journey?
before talking? So maybe that mistake was learned through reality. I'm a talker, I'm a chatty person. And I think what also comes from this, especially going back to that point you made before, that like there is so much talent in this space that comes from so many different places. I think that we're a lot of times driven by fear. We're very success oriented people. We want to have impact. We want to do a good job.
Yes.
And to take the time to listen and to move a little bit more slowly, not too slow, but to move with intention, can feel really scary when you're like, I have to get going. I have to show my knowledge. I have to show them my impact right away. And I definitely have gotten myself into holes and little pickles in that way. And so I wish someone had told me, you're not going to fall behind. You will have impact, and go in with that like listening, empathetic, curious mindset, and you'll actually move more quickly in the long run than if you just try and jump in head first.
Yeah. Sounds like you learned that the hard way, which I think most of us do. So that's I know I can include myself in that. So I'm still learning. All right, last question, and the most important. What's your favorite podcast?
I should say yours, shouldn't I? And it's so funny because I really use podcasts to just step out of the professional world and to step out of the world for a little bit. And so to all of the Austinites out there, my favorite podcast at the moment is Pod and Prejudice, which literally does a deep reading of all of Jane Austen's works and adaptations. Wow. It is not only utterly delightful, it's read through a modern lens and is much more relevant in a cultural and professional space than you would imagine. My favorite being, I had an Emma moment lately where I realized that I was both being dramatic and really didn't have a lot of problems. So any Emma readers out there will empathize. And then again, being a runner, really love the Ellie on the Run show, which just takes a really, really human approach to building community within both the recreational and the professional running world. So those are mine.
That's great. Now, I'm glad you didn't mention mine, because this shows your depth and your breadth of, across not just business and all the things that we talked about today, but obviously you're interested in literature and listening and drowning yourself out from all the other craziness of life with something like Pod and Prejudice. So that's great. Awesome. Well, thanks for those answers, Katie. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise on marketing to developers.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this.
You bet. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Porter's Product Marketing Podcast. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. We'll be back soon with more insights to help you elevate your product marketing strategy. Until next time, keep innovating and keep delivering value.